Most men are busy trying to impress women. But the men women actually chase are playing a different game entirely. They're not performing, they're becoming. Becoming men of direction, of depth, of discipline, men who don't beg for attention because their presence commands it. See, women don't chase the loudest guy in the room. They chase the one who doesn't need the room to validate him. He's the one with purpose in his eyes, boundaries in his life, and calm in his voice. He's curious not to manipulate, but to connect. He listens because he wants to understand, not because he's waiting for his turn to talk. He doesn't need to be the center of the universe, because he already has a universe within him. If you want women to chase you, stop chasing approval. Start chasing excellence. Build habits that sharpen your identity, that anchor your emotions, that align with your values. Because attraction isn't created in the moment you meet her. It's built in the man you become before she even shows up. Confidence isn't something you're born with. It's not something you inherit, copy, or steal. It's not found in a book, a podcast, or a flashy outfit. Real confidence, the kind that turns heads quietly and makes people lean in without even realizing why, is built from the inside out. It's not loud. It doesn't brag. It doesn't need to prove itself. And most importantly, it cannot be borrowed. A lot of men try to mimic confidence by imitating what they think confident men look or sound like. They mirror body language, rehearse clever lines, and wear designer clothes thinking that if they look the part, they'll else become the part. But what they're really doing is borrowing someone else's identity, someone else's vibe, and eventually that mask slips. Because the truth always reveals itself in silence, in pressure, and in intimacy. Borrowed confidence can't survive scrutiny. It cracks under tension. It folds when life pushes back. The man who builds confidence, however, is playing the long game. He doesn't fake calm. He creates it by putting himself through discomfort and coming out stronger. He doesn't pretend to know who he is. He wrestles with his values until he knows what matters enough to live and die for. He doesn't hide behind a curated version of himself online. He does the slow, unseen work offline that gives his presence real weight when he walks into a room. He's not chasing validation, he's building alignment. Confidence is built when a man keeps the promises he makes to himself. When he says he'll wake up early, and he does. When he says he'll stop watching things that drain his energy, and he means it. When he says he'll speak up, ask for what he wants, or walk away from what disrespects him, and he follows through. Every small win stacks. Every decision rooted in integrity becomes another brick in the foundation. Confidence, in that sense, is a self-respect muscle. And you can't build muscle by thinking about it. You build it by putting in reps, especially when it's inconvenient, especially when no one is watching. And yes, confidence can be quiet. A man who knows his worth doesn't need to compete with everyone in the room. He doesn't need to dominate conversations or chase applause. His groundedness is the signal. It shows up in the way he holds eye contact without aggression, how he listens without rushing to respond, how he speaks with clarity instead of volume. You can feel it in the way he moves. Deliberate, not frantic. Focused, not reactive. That kind of presence can't be faked because it's forged in personal accountability, in failures owned, and lessons integrated. What makes this kind of confidence so attractive to women isn't that it tries to impress. It's that it radiates safety, direction, and emotional stability. A woman doesn't chase a man because he's the loudest or flashiest. She chases the man who makes her feel emotionally seen and energetically grounded. She chases the man who doesn't try to dominate her experience but deepens it simply by being in his own truth. If you want to build confidence, stop looking outside for permission to feel worthy. Start looking inside for the parts of yourself you've ignored, neglected, or outsourced. Build discipline. Build purpose. Build your voice. Build your standards. Because when confidence is built, not borrowed, it becomes unshakable. And when you live from that place, everything and everyone that belongs to you starts finding its way to you, without force, without begging, just by being real. Perfection is a performance. Purpose is a presence. And when it comes to attraction, the man who lives with purpose will always outshine the one who hides behind perfection. Too many men believe that in order to be wanted, they must first become flawless, physically polished, emotionally guarded, never stumbling, never unsure. But perfection is sterile. It's intimidating without being inviting. It keeps people at a distance. On the other hand, purpose draws people in, not because it's tidy or impressive, but because it's avid alive. A man with purpose is moving. He's becoming. He's connected to something deeper than attention, likes, or praise. He may not have it all figured out, but he knows where he's going, and that direction becomes magnetic. He's not living to avoid mistakes. He's living to make meaning. And that energy is contagious. Women aren't searching for perfect men. They're drawn to men who know what they care about, who are building something beyond their ego, who live like their days matter. Perfection is brittle. One crack and the whole illusion breaks. But purpose is flexible. It bends, it adapts, it recovers. A purposeful man can admit when he's wrong because his identity isn't built on pretending to always be right. He can be vulnerable because his value doesn't depend on an unblemished image. That openness creates space for trust, and trust is where real intimacy begins. The man chasing perfection usually ends up performing rather than connecting. He says what he thinks people want to hear. He avoids conflict to keep up appearances. He's more focused on being admired than being known. But admiration fades. It's shallow. What lasts is resonance. The feeling someone gives you when they're fully present, fully human, and fully engaged with what matters to them. Purpose fuels that kind of presence. There's a certain glow to a man on a mission. He may not be wealthy, but he invests in his craft. He may not be the most articulate, but he speaks with conviction. He may not have the cleanest past, but he owns his story. And that authenticity makes people want to be around him. Because it's rare. In a world full of curated perfection and filtered lives, purpose cuts through the noise. What's more, purpose is attractive because it's not dependent on other people. It doesn't wait for approval. It doesn't shift with trends. It holds steady. And when a man moves with that kind of clarity, he gives women something they crave but rarely find: emotional safety. Not safety in the sense of protection from harm, but safety in the sense of consistency, direction, and truth. She knows he won't collapse under pressure. She knows he's not easily distracted by flattery. She knows he won't lose himself trying to impress her, because he already belongs to something greater than her opinion. This doesn't mean you have to have your life perfectly mapped out. It just means you have to start living these on purpose. Get clear about your values. Get curious about what fuels you. Take ownership of your time, your energy, your attention. Let go of trying to appear flawless and start showing up fully. Own your rough edges. Share your passions. Speak your truth. And trust that the right people will be drawn to your direction, not your decoration. Because in the end, no one falls in love with perfection. They fall in love with purpose. They fall in love with movement, with meaning, with a man who's going somewhere and invites them to come along, not because he needs them to complete him, but because he's already complete enough to share the journey. In a world filled with noise, distraction, and emotional detachment, emotional presence has become rare. And because it's rare, it's incredibly powerful. Most people are used to being half heard, half seen, or outright dismissed. They're used to surface level conversations, transactional interactions, and people who respond out of obligation, not curiosity. So when someone comes along who is fully there, who listens, who feels, who leans in rather than checks out, they don't just get noticed, they get remembered. A man who is emotionally present doesn't need to be the loudest in the room. His presence speaks before he does. It says, "I'm here. I see you. You matter." And that feeling, for most women, is more attractive than physical beauty, status, or charm. Because women are not just looking for someone to impress them. They're looking for someone who can witness them. Someone who's not just looking at their body, but listening to their soul. That starts with presence. Presence is not just about being physically close. It's about bringing your full attention into the moment. When a man looks into a woman's eyes without rushing to respond or fix her feelings, he communicates something deeply human: safety. Emotional safety is what allows vulnerability to exist. It's what allows connection to deepen. And without it, nothing meaningful can take root. You can't fake it. You can't script it. Presence requires you to feel, and feeling is uncomfortable for many men, especially those taught that emotional openness is weakness. But presence isn't weakness. It's discipline. It's strength under control. It's the ability to sit with another person's emotions. Grief, joy, confusion, desire, without running away, shutting down, or trying to make it about you. It's showing up without needing to be the hero or the expert. It's being steady enough in your own emotions that someone else's storm doesn't drown you. That kind of presence doesn't just attract, it heals. Emotional presence also reveals character. A man who can hold space for a woman in her complexity, who doesn't get defensive when she's upset, who doesn't minimize her experiences to protect his ego, is a man she can trust. And trust is more seductive than any compliment. Because the more a woman feels emotionally seen, the more she lets her guard down, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. She stops performing. She softens. She opens. And that kind of intimacy is born only in the atmosphere of real presence. But emotional presence isn't just for her benefit. It transforms the man as well. It forces him to tune into his own feelings. It demands emotional intelligence, patience, and empathy. It creates deeper friendships, clearer communication, and more fulfilling connections across every area of life. And it's not something you arrive at overnight. It takes practice. It takes honesty. It takes the courage to slow down and feel what you've been avoiding. The emotionally present man becomes rare not because it's impossible, but because most men never slow down enough to cultivate it. They're chasing distractions, achievements, validation, but none of those things satisfy for long. Presence, however, nourishes both the giver and the receiver. It creates resonance instead of reaction. It invites closeness without pressure. And most of all, it creates trust. In the end, you don't have to be perfect, rich, tall, or brilliant to be attractive. You have to be here, fully, consistently, genuinely. Because presence is power, and the man who masters it will never be short of meaningful connection. Women don't chase presence because it's trendy. They chase it because it's rare. And they stay with it because it makes them feel more like themselves. Boundaries are often misunderstood. People confuse them with distance, rejection, or coldness. But true boundaries aren't walls designed to keep people out. They're doors that teach others how to come in. Boundaries define the space in which respect can grow, intimacy can deepen, and desire can flourish. And when they're done right, boundaries don't make you seem unavailable. They make you irresistible. Because they signal that your attention is earned, not given away freely. And that creates mystery, not games, not manipulation, but real magnetic curiosity. When a man has clear boundaries, he's telling the world something very specific. I know myself. I know what I tolerate and what I won't. I know where I end and you begin. He doesn't have to be rude about it. He doesn't need to over-explain. He simply moves with clarity, and that clarity becomes attractive. Because in a world full of over-accessibility and constant validation, seeking a man who respects his time, energy, and emotion stands out. Women are drawn to mystery, but not the kind that hides everything or plays hard to get. The kind of mystery that makes them want to learn more. And that kind of mystery is built when a man knows when to say yes and when to say no. When he chooses connection without abandoning himself. When he can hold space for a woman's needs without sacrificing his own. That's not just attractive, it's mature, and maturity creates safety. Safety creates space for desire to breathe. Without boundaries, desire suffocates. If you're always available, always agreeable, always adjusting to be liked, you stop being a person and start being a mirror. There's no tension, no polarity, no individuality. That kind of emotional overexposure doesn't invite intimacy. It repels it. It says, I'll become whatever you need me to be. And while that may feel selfless, it's actually rooted in fear. The fear of being abandoned or rejected if you show up as your full self. But a man with healthy boundaries is different. He doesn't fear being alone because he enjoys his own company. He doesn't chase validation because he already validates himself. And that independence doesn't push people away. It invites them to step closer on his terms. He creates a space where he can be close to someone without losing himself. That's where intimacy becomes sustainable. That's where connection becomes real. Boundaries also teach people how to respect you. Not through punishment, but through example. When you say, I need time to think, or that doesn't feel right for me, or I'm not available for that kind of conversation, you're teaching people how to engage with you. You're not closing the door, you're guiding them through it with respect. That kind of self-awareness builds trust, because people trust those who trust themselves. Mystery grows when people feel like there's more to learn, more layers to peel back, and that only happens when you don't overshare everything all at once, when you protect the sacred parts of your inner world, and when you reveal yourself gradually with intention. That doesn't mean you're being manipulative or withholding love. It means you value your truth enough to not give it away without discernment. So many men think the key to attraction is being constantly available, always eager, endlessly giving. But in truth, the man who knows how to say no without guilt and yes, without losing himself, is the one who gets chased, not because he's hard to get, but because he's whole. Boundaries don't disconnect you. They protect your connection to yourself. And when a man honors that connection, others will naturally want to earn the privilege of stepping into his world. Not because he demanded their attention, but because he respected himself enough to never beg for it. Charm may open the door, but it's consistency that invites someone to stay. In a world full of empty words, quick chemistry, and instant gratification, charm has become common. It's practiced, polished, and often performative. Anyone can rehearse a line, flash a smile, or create a moment that feels good. But consistency is rare, and that rarity makes it powerful. Because where charm excites, consistency earns trust. And trust is what makes people stay. A lot of men learn how to attract, but few learn how to maintain. They study seduction, but not sincerity. They're charismatic in the beginning, generous with compliments, attentive in texts, present on the first few dates. But as soon as effort becomes inconvenient or the novelty fades, so does the charm. And what's left behind isn't love, it's confusion. That's the emotional roller coaster so many women get trapped in, being pulled in by promise, only to be let down by inconsistency. Consistency, on the other hand, isn't flashy. It's not a grand gesture. It's quiet, steady, and often invisible. It's checking in when you said you would. It's showing up when it's no longer exciting, but still meaningful. It's keeping your word even when it's hard. It's doing the right thing, not to impress, but because it aligns with who you are. And the thing about consistency is that it builds over time. It's not a single spark. It's a slow burning fire that keeps people warm long after the charm has faded. For a woman, consistency isn't just attractive. It's grounding. It tells her, you can exhale here. That she doesn't have to constantly guess where she stands or what's coming next. That she's not just experiencing a phase or a mood, but a man who is emotionally reliable. And that reliability becomes a safe place for vulnerability, for softness, for trust. Because real intimacy can't grow in unpredictability. It needs roots, and roots require stability. Charm may get you attention, but it can't hold emotional weight. It doesn't resolve conflict. It doesn't weather storms. It doesn't hold space when your partner is hurting. Charm fades in silence, but consistency speaks even when words fail. It shows up when it's inconvenient. It stays when things get messy. And in doing so, it says more about a man's character than anything he could say with flair or finesse. The truth is, anyone can be charming once. Few can be consistent daily. And that's why the man who is consistent stands out. Not because he tries harder, but because he lives aligned with his values. He doesn't chase highs. He doesn't perform. He simply honors his word, his time, and the people he cares about. That type of energy isn't addictive. It's healing. It invites openness, not anxiety. It creates space for love to breathe, not pressure to prove. Consistency also reflects how a man treats himself. If he's disciplined with his routines, honest with his feelings, and clear about his intentions, that internal structure shows up in how he treats others. He doesn't need to control outcomes or manipulate attention because he's grounded in who he is. He understands that being reliable isn't boring. It's magnetic. Because people are starving for stability in a world that keeps offering sparks with no fire. So if you want to be truly irresistible, don't just learn how to charm a woman, learn how to be consistent with her. Be the man who means what he says. Be the man who's the same when no one's looking. Be the man who doesn't just start strong, but finishes strong again and again. Because charm might make her look your way, but consistency is what makes her trust that staying is safe. And in the end, the men who are consistent will always be more powerful than the ones who are just impressive. Most people think that to be interesting, you need to be impressive, have wild stories, a flashy lifestyle, a unique talent, or some magnetic personality trait that sets you apart. But that's not what draws people in. What actually makes someone interesting is their ability to be interested. Genuinely, curiously, attentively interested. Because when you make someone feel like they matter, they associate that feeling with are you. They want to be around you, not because you're a performer, but because they feel more alive in your presence. Being interested requires humility. It means you're not trying to dominate the conversation or steer it toward your highlights reel. You're not just waiting for your turn to talk. You're not scanning for approval. You're present. You're listening, not just to the words, but to the emotions behind them. You're asking thoughtful questions because you actually want to know the answer. That level of engagement is rare, and it's powerful, because most people live in a world where no one really listens. So when you do, you become unforgettable. When a man is genuinely curious, he becomes magnetic, not because he's trying to be, but because he creates space for connection to unfold naturally. He's not trying to impress, he's trying to understand. He asks things like, "What lights you up?" Or, "What made you feel most alive this year?" Instead of just, "What do you do?" That shift turns small talk into soul talk. It makes conversations feel more like experiences than interviews. And that's where intimacy starts, not in showing off, but in showing up. Being interested also shows confidence. Not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet kind that doesn't need the spotlight. A man who's curious about others isn't trying to prove his worth. He's secure enough in himself to focus outward instead of constantly managing his own image. He's not obsessed with being seen as important. He's focused on errors making others feel important. And paradoxically, that makes him more interesting than someone who never stops talking about himself. When it comes to attraction, especially with women, this is a game changer. Because while many men try to capture attention with charm or bravado, the men women remember are the ones who made them feel something. The ones who actually noticed. The ones who asked how her day really was and stayed present long enough to hear the truth. The ones who followed up days later because they remembered the little things. That's not strategy, that's sincerity. And sincerity builds emotional safety, which is the foundation of real desire. Being interested also keeps you growing. It keeps you learning. It makes you a better friend, a better partner, a better leader. When you live with curiosity, you start seeing people as books you've never read, rather than puzzles you need to solve or impress. You realize that everyone has a story, and if you listen long enough, you'll find gold. That mindset makes your conversations richer, your relationships deeper, and your presence more meaningful. And here's the real secret. People open up to those who make them feel seen. And when they open up, they create space for you to share too. It becomes a mutual unfolding, not a performance. You stop trying to be interesting, and you simply are because your energy invites honesty. That's what people crave, not perfection, not entertainment, but presence. So if you want to be magnetic, start by being interested. Be the man who notices, the man who asks, the man who listens. Not because you're trying to win people over, but because you actually give a damn. That kind of energy doesn't just attract attention. It earns respect, builds trust, and creates relationships worth remembering.